Navigating the motherhood journey as a community also means constantly looking for solid resources to give us more and better tools. Today, we chat with Kiva Schuler, the founder and CEO of the Jai Institute for Parenting and the author of the groundbreaking book, The Peaceful Parenting Revolution: Changing the World by Changing How We Parent. This book examines the consequences of traditional parenting methods and offers a more modern approach grounded in emotional intelligence, value led leadership, and effective communication.
We read the books, we bought the things. We thought we were ready. And then life took our plans and changed them. I'm Karen, I'm Victoria's mommy, and I work in tech.
And I'm Pamela. I have a baby boy named Ford, and I'm a journalist. And although we're both first-time working moms, we're actually pretty different.
And that's totally okay. Because we both agree that our most important work is raising our kids. We really need each other and can only get through this together. Welcome to Motherish Moments.
All right, I'm super excited for today's episode. Pamela is not in the studio today, which is a bummer, but she's not feeling well. So obviously we want her to feel better as soon as possible so she can get back in here with me. So I guess I will jump into my motherish moment very quickly. We were at Disney, recently together, but Motherish got invited. It was like fantastic. But prior to the trip, Victoria, my daughter is 5 years old. So Victoria was like, "Mommy, I am not into princesses anymore. So I don't want to take any dresses or anything like that." And I was like, man, this girl, I think for most of age 3 and 4, she only wore princess dresses like everywhere, basically. You name it, anywhere we had to go, she was wearing a princess dress. So I was definitely like, my heart kind of was like, oh, okay. But, I try to just let her do her thing and, dress with however her heart desires. So within, reason and appropriate for the weather. So I was like, okay, fine. We get to Disney. She starts seeing people just around the hotel. We hadn't even gone to the park yet. Sees around the hotel girls in princess dresses. Mommy, where's my dresses? Where are my dresses? I'm like, you said that you are not into this anymore. I mean, what do you like? She goes, I want a dress. I don't have a dress, whatever. And I'm like, and I was so annoyed, but also I was so relieved. But then I was also like, but do I want her diving into the princess culture? I mean, it's just like I thought like 7,000 things at the same time. Um, but I was like, she's still my baby girl, you know? So I was kind of excited. But in the end, I was like, I'm not buying you a dress. I also was like holding my ground. I was like, I'm not buying you a dress. They're crazy, like expensive. That's not what I plan to do. So you have a normal type of dress, like just a regular little summer dress, and that's what you're gonna wear. It was a whole thing. Because she's a girl and this is what it's like. But yeah, so that was my motherish moment with her. Kiva, our guest today, she's gonna share her motherish moment and then I'll dive deeper into introducing her. Kiva, you want to go ahead with your motherish moment?
So speaking of little girls, my little girl is 18. Both of my kids are in college now. And that's a transition for sure. It's a little, one of those beautiful awfuls. And there are these moments. So my daughter is a freshman at the University of Miami. She just went through Rush, and this week is like their big little week.
Mhm.
And she has been calling me every day and just like dumping, gushing. This happened, and then this happened, and this happened. We were on the phone yesterday for 2 hours, and it honestly felt like I was sitting in a warm bathtub. Like I was just like, tell me more, baby. Tell me all the things. But the funny moment was there was some like shenanigan stuff that happened this week, apparently. And she's like, do you want me to send you the video? And I was like, hard no. Like things that mommies just don't need to see.
Yeah. That I at some point during this episode, I'm gonna need you to tell us the secret of how to get your child to tell you all the things, and because it happens to me right now with Victoria during bedtime, usually lights off, and she'll just start And I know that she's like avoiding bedtime, which is fine because I'm getting all of this stuff out of her. Like she's just opening up. So, but I'm worried, like, when does that end? How do I continue this? Anyway, so Kiva Schuler,
Today leads to that. Sorry,
no,
talked
perfect.
over you.
No, no, no. But this is what we need. This is what we need. So Kiva is the founder and CEO of the Jai Institute for Parenting. She's also an author. She's also a podcaster. Actually, on the way here, I was listening to the first episode of your podcast, and I was getting a little teary-eyed because I think it just it resonates with me, and I know so many mothers and parents overall so much. You really want to try to do your best. And there's something that you said in that first episode, an anecdote that you were sharing when you were brushing your daughter's hair and in the bathroom, and you were frustrated and you did something, and then you realized that it's your emotions are the ones that need to be guided in that process, not putting that on our kids, which we do so much. So let's take a step back. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey, how you were inspired by taking this path?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a divorced household and lived with my mom most of the time. My mom is a like feminist dinosaur. She worked in New York media. She taught me I could do anything, probably literally thought that I should be the first female president of the United States. I had unconditional love from her, a lot of pressure, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. My dad remarried a very kind of traditionally oriented woman, and they had a son, my half brother, Ian. And so I had this perspective as a teenager of very different parenting styles. I was supported, I was mentored, I was taught, I was built up. My brother was like something that was cute on Tuesday, got Tabasco and soap in his mouth on Thursday. And I could see when I was, 15, 16 years old that his spirit was just being crushed. His eyes were dimming, his fierceness was going away. And I made myself a promise in that moment that when I became a parent, I would do whatever I could to do it fairly. I think it felt so unfair to me what was happening to him, and I didn't know how to protect him. And so fast forward kind of that, those stories, there's certainly more than one that you alluded to. I had a degree in psychology, studied family systems, I'd become a life coach. I think for many of us in the field, we think like, oh, this parenting thing's going to be easy peasy for me. Yeah, no. I was like psycho lunatic mother. And in that moment that you mentioned, realized, yeah, it's not necessarily the kid's behavior that needs to change first, it's ours. And so, here we are 15 years later, and the Jai Institute for Parenting is now the world's leading parent coach certification program. We have trained over 2,500 parent coaches from 65 different countries. It kind of boggles my mind and humbles me to my knees. But the reality of our work is that we are a parent-centric methodology that teaches skills like nervous system regulation, empowered communication, values-led leadership, and works on those defense mechanisms and blind spots that we all have that are innocent adaptations that we created to stay safe when we were kids. And so we're all about breaking the cycles here at Jai.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Actually, extremely relatable to me on a personal level because and I guess year one into my separation, and my daughter is adjusting to a life where of shared time, right, with me and her father. And there's so much in this process that I've had to unpack from my own childhood. Like it's crazy how all that stuff comes up in how you parent, in how you contain, or how you maybe sometimes not contain, but break apart why you're acting a certain way, where it comes from, and how that can directly impact your child, right? I think one of the biggest learnings that I had in this process was that my child, although I wasn't saying, or like arguing or showing that I was mad or sad or whatever, they know. They always can pick up on what you're feeling. And so it makes it so much more important for you to work on whatever you really have going on inside because your kids are little sponges. They pick it all up. Talk to us a little bit about your book.
Hmm. So, we've been training parent coaches for a long time and we didn't really have anything that could speak directly to parents. These skills and ideas that we have at JAI are universal, right? They're age agnostic, they're culture agnostic. They're really about growing ourselves up so that we can do a better job of growing our kids up. And so I wanted to write the book, first of all, to provide that framework to as many people as possible, but more importantly, to share the diversity of experience and cultures that we work with at JAI. Because I think, when we're speaking to a global audience, we have to be very empathetic that not everyone's worldview is like ours.
Mm.
And so there can be a defense of ideas like, well, I don't love the words gentle parenting, peaceful parenting. I think they can kind of set us up to fail, but that's not for me. We've even had to learn at JAI, there are people that come from countries where certain forms of physical punishment are revered. They are a part of that culture. And who are we to say that's bad or that's good? And so the book is an invitation to parents to become more intentional and to recognize, identify the values that matter within that family system, right? We're all different. We all get to be different. And then lead with those intentionally versus parenting reactively to whatever's happening in the moment. I like to think of parents as leaders, right? We are a leader, and a leader has a vision for a future that they are bringing the people that are following them toward. It's like the distant mountain, right? We're a family and we're going to go that way.
Mm. What are some of the hardest things you think in the early stages of parenting that a lot of parents face? Like, what are some of the biggest lessons you think that happen at the very beginning?
I think the first thing to recognize is that the early years of parenting are hard. This idea that it's all going to be like making cookies and cute, like children under the age of 5. Let's back up a second and talk about brains.
Yes.
So children are born with infant brains that develop into toddler brains, young child brains, right? I think a lot of people think a child has an adult brain and an adult's brain's capacity inside of a tiny body, right? We just don't think about it. That's not the case. And so, I was talking to a mom on Twitter the other day that had 3 kids under 5, and she's like,
Oof.
I'm failing. This is so hard. I don't think I'm doing a good job. I'm like, no, mama, it's hard because you essentially have impulsive like highs and lows. And that's just how brains under the age of 5 work. It's kind of the block and tackle years, redirection, right? Prevention, right? How do we make sure everyone's got enough food and enough rest, setting yourself up for success? But a 4-year-old is not going to be able to deploy the logic to stop his impulse to hit his baby sister over the head with a block. He's not a bad kid. He's a 4-year-old.
Mhm.
So, that's why a little bit of child development knowledge in every parent would be like a dream come true for me so that we can have appropriate expectations. So I think, that's the big thing is it doesn't always look like what we thought it was going to look like. And I think when we recognize that something is hard, we're more accepting of it. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
and this too shall pass. These phases that kids go through, they're temporal. I think we also tend to think like, oh, if I don't fix this, when my kid's 20, they're never going to be able to like clean a bathroom. they mature and grow over time. A lot of it gets taken care of just with maturation.
Mm. You got me really intrigued on the brain development part of it. How does that change after 5? What happens after 5?
Oh my goodness, this could be a whole session. It ebbs and flows. So a child's brain actually, when you look at like a toddler brain to a young child, they have areas of their brain that are far more developed than ours. For example, language acquisition. Like, think about how quickly children can learn language. Children in multilingual homes, it's not even a problem for them. They understand that's because that part of their brain is hardwired to be extra available at that time. That means there's less things in the prefrontal cortex, which is where logic, executive function, all that, right? They're learning how the world works between ages, and this is all neuronormative, so it's obviously, right, like every child is their own child and has their own path, but we're going to speak neuronormatively. The ages from like 6 to 12, those are the golden magical years by and large. It's where children want to be of assistance. It's great teaching years. If you can have this values-based conversation in these golden years of brain development, our children are still highly attuned to us. They're wired to be part of the family. It's what they require for safety and survival. And so those are kind of the magical years. And it's where a lot of parents take their foot off parenting because the kids seem easy. But
Mm.
that's a trap because then as they start to move into their preteen and teen years, the brain literally needs to, what's that word with trees when you trim them back? Um, anyway, the brain needs to
Into
completely
landscaping.
reorganize.
Lost me.
Exactly. Yes, some fancy word that I don't do that.
I don't do that. My face was a deer in headlights. I was like, nope, I don't touch plants because
Don't do the trees so they grow better. That's what the teenager's brain is doing. It's literally getting rid of all the neurons that it no longer needs for rapid learning and growing new, more efficient ways of operating. So that's called the default mode network. It's like when you get in the car and you are driving somewhere new, but you automatically drive to your kid's school.
Mhm.
That's the default mode network in action. So that's what teenagers' brains are developing, but it's very immature. And so when we get mad at teenagers for forgetting to take out the trash, for doing these, teenage things, for being really moody, that's just their brain development. And so as a conscious parent, an intentional parent, what we can do is scaffold them up, right? And start to help build support systems, right? So for my son, for example, we put a reminder on his phone every Friday morning to take out the trash. He never forgot again. He wasn't being defiant. He wasn't being a rebel, but this is what we're conditioned to see their behavior as. And to loop back to what you said at the beginning, when we do this for them, they will not lose trust in us,
Mm.
right? Like if we're labeling them, if we're calling them names, if we're not having empathy and compassion for what is a really hard time of life,
Yeah.
yeah, they're gonna shut us out.
Yeah.
That makes perfect. I would too.
Yeah. I as Victoria, my daughter has grown, little years, it's only 5 years, almost 6, but as the time has gone by, I have learned to be more empathetic with myself and try to be more understanding of her. So there are days where, especially with this whole season that she's been living, there's days where she's just in a funk, and basic things that on a normal day don't, have any obstacles. There are some days where they're just hard. And something that I try to remind myself of in the process is that I also have those days, and I'm like, she's human, right? Like there are days where I wake up on the wrong side of the bed and until I really do the work to figure out what's really bothering me, I'm sometimes in a mood and I can't tell you why. And because I don't know, or I don't want to, or and so I try to carry that same grace with her and just be like, I'll often try to something that her therapist has taught me, because I we have, she's in therapy. Something that I've learned in that process is sometimes when you feel like you're off the rails a little bit, I find a way to reconnect and reset, right? Whether it's like I go outside with her, I will do something to focus, even if it's like a 5 minute, 10-minute moment where it's just us, just something very simple. I sometimes will literally just hug her and be like, hey, do you need a hug? Like, do you want to have a moment where we're just together? Um, but but I also at the same time worry about like boundaries and all of these things. So how do we weave in the education that, we're here to raise our children also. We need to educate them. But also I guess be a container for when they can't manage themselves. How do we navigate that kind of ebb and flow?
Okay, so you said so many beautiful things there. The first thing that we want to kind of disentangle and it's hard, it takes practice, is our children's emotional experience from our emotional experience. Now, that doesn't mean that when they are sad, we're not going to feel sad. What it means is that we're not going to try to alleviate our sadness by fixing theirs or distracting them from theirs or in the culture that we're in, not following through on the boundary because they're angry with us and we're afraid of losing their affection or their trust. This is what emotional maturity is. We can all have our emotions, feel them, and express them in healthy ways, but be wary of codependency. So,
Mm,
codependency is when our feelings are enmeshed with theirs, and we need another person to feel a certain way to feel safe. This is the work that we teach our parent coaches to do because this is tricky and, especially for committed parents. Oof, is this hard?
mm,
So our child being sad or upset that we set a boundary or angry with us that we, didn't bring the dress to Disneyland is okay.
yeah.
We need them to have those experiences, to sit with them and to figure out their own strategies to move forward. We can provide support, we can provide guidance, but we don't want to fix, we don't want to distract, and we don't want to minimize.
Mm,
So that's number one. When I started Jai in 2009, it was a really different world. People were still, it was like the age of the super nanny. People were still really heavily relying on timeouts and consequences that weren't directly related to the lesson that needed to be taught. And so I started Jai with the intention that it was wholly possible to parent children well and to raise them into responsible, compassionate citizens of the world that would be leaders without resorting to tools that cause harm.
mm,
I think we've moved away from that, but because I have two kids in college, I have kind of a front row seat into a lot of these kids not having the skills to make independent decisions, who, lose their center at the smallest disappointment, who need their parents to figure out their class schedule for them. And so I worry about this pendulum because I don't want the world to go back to, we need to put kids in their place and get them to behave and demand compliance. That is not what modern culture needs. So where's the both and, right? How can we both be leaders that have expectations, that have boundaries, have rules, and hold those with compassion and with empathy and with solid groundedness in our own bodies, right? When I say to my child, um, you were out past 11 last night and did not communicate with me, and that broke an agreement that we have. I felt scared. I felt worried. Um, what happened, right? And they can reflect that back to me. And then I say, well, how do we fix this, right? What do you think should happen here? What is your commitment to ensuring that this isn't going to happen to get again? And that can be, that was obviously a teenage conversation, but this can happen with young children too. How are you going to make this right?
Mm.
And they'll come up with it. Now, this is giving them agency. It's teaching them personal responsibility. So, as peaceful, intentional parents, it's not that we're doormats, we're not pushovers. We're not going to go power under where the child's needs make our needs subservient to theirs. We want to be in power with. I have feelings and needs that matter. You have feelings and needs that matter. And how together can we collaborate to make sure that in the best way we can try to get everyone's needs met?
Mm. I often think about um that parenting is like the long game, right? Like there are a lot of things that we do, especially in their like elementary school years, where we're laying the foundation for what we will be faced with in the middle school and high school years, and even after, even in their, I mean, I remember the version of me in my early 20s and how I my dynamic of how I saw my parents and my opinions about them, and they're drastically different as to how I saw them once I became a parent, like just night and day. But I kind of try to find the balance of like how much pressure do I put on myself around like you got to do your best here, because then if not, when she's a teenager, it's going to come back and whatever. And so I often tell myself, yeah, I often tell myself, you're doing the best you can with the information that you have. And that's how I kind of try to reset. But here we go. I'm like, what are your thoughts on, is that true? Is there validity to this? Like to these golden years that you're saying, or I don't know if you call them golden years. That's not what, I don't know if that's what you called them, but like this 6 to 12, how important is that era? And how is it directly related to the teenage era, which is honestly my greatest fear?
It doesn't need to be scary. Teenagers are so awesome. I love them. Okay, so all this pressure that we put on ourselves and this future casting that we do isn't 90% of the time is not useful.
Mm.
And like God, I want parents to have more fun again.
Yeah.
And fun doesn't mean that we're spending every waking moment perseverating over our child's needs and connecting with them and playing with them, because what they also need is a healthy sense of self
Yeah.
and independence and time to, like, in age appropriate ways, explore the world independently and without us. And you know what? We can go get a manicure, take a bath. Um, I like to think that we want to save our parenting moments, right? Those times where we're needing to use a more assertive voice, when we're needing to hold the boundaries for when it really matters. Right. So a 4-year-old screaming and running around the room is normal 4-year-old behavior. How can we create conditions for that to happen successfully for our nervous system? Right. Because a parent will, scold that child and try to get them to control. How about like go to the park, And I know these things aren't always possible, but there are times when a child crosses a boundary that is unacceptable. And that's when we need to lean in and reflect on how that experience, impacted us, find out what happened for them, create a new solution, right? And sometimes there will be a consequence. You know, a child choosing to ride their bike without a helmet may lose access to that bike for a while until they can commit to doing it safely, right? We want to create consequences that are teaching mechanisms, not punishing mechanisms. Um, the rest of it, like, I think we underestimate the power of regular of maturity, right? Like brains will grow up. Life is going to teach our child some really hard lessons. And I would rather, I'll speak for myself, I would rather be the safety net that they come back to rather than the person that they experience, like holding them back
Mm.
from having, you know, whatever happened at the University of Miami this week,
Right.
right? Like, I
Yeah.
don't need to know, but if something bad happened, I would have been the first phone call. So, trust is the most precious asset that we get to maintain if we want that kind of relationship with our teenagers and young and emerging adults,
Hmm.
where they run toward us when things go wrong,
Yeah.
where they trust us enough to do the gush and tell us all the things because they know, like, I think of myself as kind of the mothership now, right? Like they're on their little jets exploring the universe, but they're going to come refuel here.
Mm.
And I don't know, I kind of like that analogy for myself. And so in those 6 to 12, it's like we want to give them that tether, right? And that tether is going to get longer and longer. And just making those moments for connection is enough. And saving the big P parenting for when it's actually necessary and not about making us feel better.
Right. Yes. Okay. I hear that. I hear that. Um, Gosh, there's so I as I'm listening to you, I'm like like reviewing the things that I do. I wanted to hear your thoughts on how to navigate um this happens in homes where both parents are together, living together. It also happens in co-parenting. I think it happens in any scenario where you could have different styles, different perspectives of how to raise your children, and how do we navigate that as the adults, right? How do we navigate like the different types, the different standards we may have for boundaries, the different levels of trust that we have in our children to be able to resist challenges or navigate challenges? What are some of your thoughts on approaching that?
Yeah. So it's again very unique. And I heard you say you were recently separated from your child's dad. Me too. I got divorced when my kids were 9 and 11. It's hard. It's really, really hard. And I think it's dependent on their ages. It's dependent on the relationship that you have with your co-parent in a parenting dyad where the parents are together. We hear many of our students say, like, my partner is not on board with this. They're really judgmental of it. They think I'm being too soft on my 5-year-old. They think that I need to be punishing them. And so in that scenario, my invitation is always to, as much as possible, stay in your own wheelhouse as you're going through this process. JAI is a personal growth and development program for adults. We're not here to we're not parenting experts, we're parent-child relationship experts.
Mm.
And so this work of working on yourself, understanding how you judge another person, how defenses will come up, right, when an ego is feeling under attack, is really helpful in terms of being more compassionate, even to the people that we love the most or hate the most, right? We can see them through a new lens because we understand that our defense mechanisms are innocent. right? We develop these strategies because we didn't get our needs met when we were a child. And so that's likely true for this person that we're judging or feeling in conflict with as well. And so compassion and empathy can really start to emerge naturally. They can't be forced.
Right.
So that's number one. Number two, I found myself in a situation where that was not going to happen, right? Like the breach was too great, the hurt was too deep, and at a certain and I tried very ham-fistedly at the beginning to advocate for my children when they were at their dad's house. And at a certain point, I just realized I was making it worse because the more that I tried to control his behavior, the more frustrated he was with the kids. And it was the hardest thing I ever had to do. I remember talking to my coach and saying, okay, I am taking my hands off the wheel here.
Hmm.
And I am going to trust my children enough
Yeah.
that this is good.
Yeah. Can uh I think you can probably go back to hands off the wheel.
Um, So in my own work with my coach, I'm a parent coach and a therapist too. I remember this moment where it's like, I think I just need to take my hands off the wheel of trying to control this and manage what's happening. It's not my place anymore.
Mm.
And I think the big thing for me in that moment was trusting my kids enough, right? And it made them grow up fast. And I know that's not always fair, but I trusted that was whatever was happening in that house that I couldn't control, that I had no right any longer to have an opinion about, was happening for them, that they would learn really valuable life lessons
Yeah.
around, right? That my son could discern, right, with my support when he came home, right? What does it feel like? My son's like very anti-toxic masculinity, right? Like he is a feminist.
Mm.
Now he advocates for women in a way that just humbles me. And I think it's because of what he experienced. And so if we allow our children adversity and challenge and like sit in the like, oh, the mommy pain of that is coming up even of telling the story. It hurt me to
Yeah.
not be able to protect them in that environment. And Miles and I have such a shared experience of why he is who he is now, right?
Mm.
He came home, he processed, I shared stories. I tried, and wasn't always successful in doing that in a neutral way. What did you learn? What would you have done differently? How do you wish it went? Those are all the kinds of questions that I asked. But our kids learn from hard things.
Yeah. Yeah. I truly believe that. I mean, again, I think with all of these experiences, of parenting in general, right? I go back to my my own childhood, and I think about the things that I also had to endure and the person that I am today, and I'm like, we figure it out. We if we have a desire to grow and to evolve, which I think it starts there as individuals, if we have a desire to strive for growth, to be better, to learn, and to be a forever student, I think we're able to overcome and continue to process the things that have happened to us in our childhood. That was another learning I got from I don't know if it was my therapist or so, some therapist that said like the things that maybe impacted you the most in your childhood, you will go back and reevaluate how you feel about them in different stages of your life over and over, especially as it pertains to relationships, right? Once you have your first relationship, once you had like as a teenager, once you have a relationship as an adult, once you have a marriage, like you will always go back and reflect on these big moments of your childhood and you'll see them in different ways in different stages of your life, which I thought was such a beautiful way to think about it, you know?
Listen, we all have a choice, right? We can have a growth mindset, right? Where things happen for us, for our learning, a belief that life can get better. And there are other people that choose not to. And I used to like want to no, life isn't happening to you, it's happening for you.
Yeah.
And you can, but that's not everyone's path.
No.
And that's okay. I think as parents, if we're, it's going to make me emotional for some reason right now. If we show up in that way in front of our kids, right? A thing I like to say is walk or talk your walk,
Yeah.
right? Like I messed up so much as
Yeah.
a mom, like so much, but I talked my walk. Hey guys, like this thing happened to me when I was a teenager, or, yesterday I showed up like not my best. I want to do over, but I also want to explain what was happening in the background. Kids are always going to create a narrative that if you're grumpy, I run a very big business, like it is hard
Mm.
and it is 24/7. And the kids have been with me that entire time. Right? I started it when they were 4 and 5 years old. And so they learned, like, oh, mom, you seem a little short tempered today. What's happening at work?
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus like mom's being beep, yeah, and she's mad at me or she did something. And so this idea of like sharing your growth, sharing your life lessons, that then instills in them the value of being lifelong learners.
Yeah.
And so I'm a huge fan, of just trusting our kids to know us deeply. That does so much for their sense of confidence and belonging. It's not something that many of us experienced as children, but I think our kids can handle a lot more than we give them credit for.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. What you're saying is so comforting. For me, I had an experience recently where I had to take my daughter with me to work. And it's a fairly new job. I wasn't working for a while and, found myself in a position of having to go back to work. And she always gets mad because she's like, "Why don't you pick me up from school?" I'm like, "Baby, because I have to work." And like, this is what it is, you have these other options, whatever. So she went to work with me. My job is great, by the way. Like I work for the MLB, so like it's a baseball park. Like I mean, it's cool.
That's
So
so fun.
yeah, so I was working and I had to bring her with me and she's like I put her to work. Like I was like I need you to help me with this and that, whatever, with an incentive of course at the end if she did her job well. But halfway through it, she looks at me, she goes, "Hey mama." I go, "What?" And she says, "I don't want you to quit your job anymore." And I was like, "Why?" And she goes, "Because they think you're really important here. It looks like you're really important." And I swear I had to hold back because I'm in the middle of my work moment. I had to hold back my tears. And also I didn't want her to like, like feel like I just looked at her and I said, "Thank you so much." I go, "Yeah, mama, you see," I go, "This is what, little by little, you'll start to see like what I do is important and it's for us, it's for me. It's like, because I think it's so important for her to see me also as an individual, like, because I don't want her to grow up, especially being a girl, eventually a woman that like feels like her life is not hers too. We tend to default that we are for everyone else. But we are for ourselves too. And so it was just so nice. But what you're saying is just kind of like, it reminded me of that and it was very comforting in that sense.
Oh, that story is adorable.
Yeah.
Yeah, like kids want us to be happy too.
Yeah.
And I think when we invite them in to the decisions that we're making, the choices that we have to make, when we're honest in an age appropriate way,
Mhm.
um, this is how kids learn. Kids, kids aren't always going to listen to what we say, right? Like that's just never going to happen, but they will always learn from who we are.
Yeah. Yes,
And so, yeah, just it offers so much hope when we think about it that way.
does. Kiva, this was such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. Can you tell everybody where they can connect with you and with the Jai Institute? Tell us where to find you.
So our website is jaiinstituteforparenting.com, JAI instituteforparenting.com. You guys, there's so many resources on there. It's like it can be a little overwhelming, but there's a guide on how to stop yelling. There's a guide on how to have empowered communication with children. So many resources. And if you're curious about becoming a certified parent coach and doing this work with families, there's a free info kit there that you can get as well. My book, The Peaceful Parenting Revolution, is available on Amazon, and I would love for you to read it and review it. It warms my heart to see people from all over the world reading that book and feeling like it's actually a parenting book that's written from a compassionate place and not a authoritative one, which was my goal. So
Amazing. Thank you so much for being on Motherish, Kiva.
thanks for having me, Karen.